onto ventilation, and obviously ventilation can become a bit of an issue when people start to, seal up drafts in their homes. So, what options are there for people to kind of address this? I know there's, mechanical ventilation systems, but could you kind of explain this a little bit more, why this happens and what people can do about it?
Sure. I suppose as we sort of insulate our homes, when we get into, particularly, any of, and once we insulate our houses, they become more airtight. Traditionally, sort of Irish homes would be quite drafty, which I'm sure anyone, we'd all appreciate. Yeah, we'd all appreciate. But Irish homes, traditionally have been quite drafty. Lots of air changes kind of in them, and it's done on air changes per hour would be one of the metrics that's kind of used, which is a bit probably technical, but essentially it's how often does the air get changed in the home. So that would have been quite high kind of traditionally. The more work we do to our houses, when we get like double glaze, triple glazing in, we externally insulate, we do our attic. You're tightening it up and you're reducing those air changes. And I suppose the indoor air quality suffers a little bit. We all generate quite a lot of moisture through our breathing, just through life in general, cooking, cleaning, washing machines, taps, sinks, dishwashers,
Showers, yeah.
showers, baths, kind of, so in terms of, all that sort of moisture that builds up, if we're not getting those air changes in, we have kind of quite a humid environment. If there's any cold surfaces, we're going to get condensation forming, which then leads on to, damp, mold, mildew, kind of, and health issues that kind of come with that. So ventilation is really important. And traditionally, I suppose how we've addressed that is through passive ventilation. So literally a core or hole through the wall, put a grill on the front and a grill on the back, and that's kind of what you're referring to.
Done.
Job done. And most people, if you're sitting there day in, day out, and you have this hole in the wall over your shoulder, that's kind of, a gale blowing in on top of you, people will be tempted to actually block that. Never a good idea. But I suppose it does happen. So I suppose, and from an energy point of view, essentially you've either, depending on what way the wind is blowing, it's either blowing cold air in on top of you, or it'll be kind of, suctioning the hot air from the room, from your your heating system that you have on, and of course it's cooling the place down as well. So in terms of, like, there are some sort of, more recent solutions to that. So we have kind of two main ones. There's one which is demand control ventilation, and the other is mechanical heat recovery ventilation. So both of those, I suppose, the bit that's kind of in them is their, the bit that might be jumping out there is their mechanical ventilation systems. So the two different types. The demand control ventilation would probably, again, there's pros and cons to both. I particularly wouldn't have any particular preference over either in terms of what I would particularly choose. I think it's, once you have something that addresses this issue in a home, that's the important thing. So there's lots of considerations like budget, your energy rating at the end, like both will actually return. For instance, demand control ventilation would be generally cheaper to install than mechanical heat recovery ventilation. Running costs, when you take into account servicing and stuff like that, are relatively the same, but we say demand control ventilation mightn't actually, won't return, has a little bit of a negative, not a negative effect on building energy rating, but because the heat recovery ventilation system actually recovers some of the heat and brings it back into the house, your building energy rating will be slightly better at the end. But again, it will be more expensive to install. It requires more servicing and stuff like that, and it will have additional pumps and use a little bit more energy to actually run it. So on balance, it's a decision that will be made. Generally, if you're going down that route, you're kind of getting into a deeper retrofit. It's one of the last things you'll be looking at, and you might have somebody working with you to help you decide kind of on which one to go with.
Yeah.
For me anyway, what I would say is, once you get your house relatively airtight, it is important to address the ventilation. And those are the two best options to go with. Personally, I wouldn't have a huge preference to go one way or the other once that issue is addressed, kind of in a house that has become airtight through sort of retrofit works.
Yeah. And in terms of costs, do you have, like, could you share an idea of what that would be for both of those?
Again, I've kind of gone average homes. So your three bed, semi detached, kind of again, it depends whether you're going into kind of refurbs or retrofits, or if people living in a home while this is happening, it can be hard to. I think that's probably one of the main drivers towards one technology or the other, because we say if you have a house that's occupied, and you're trying to fit a mechanical ventilation system in there. There's a lot more ductwork with mechanical heat recovery ventilation than demand control ventilation. So demand control ventilation would require duct into wet rooms. So that would be like your kitchen, your bathroom, en suites, anywhere you might like a utility or something like that. So in your standard three bed semi, you'll have maybe a WC, an ensuite, kind of if the house is newer, a bathroom, and a kitchen. So that's four
Mhm.
rooms where you need to get ducts. And a lot of the times that's centrally sort of like stacked, so you can just get sort of services down in one location. So that type of install, again, you're talking probably, under 5,000, and then like, your mechanical heat recovery, probably between, again, maybe 30-40% kind of more depending on the house as well. So
Yeah, but definitely something to consider, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you get into deeper retrofits, like especially, you're spending kind of quite a lot of money on external wall insulation, heat pumps, all that sort of stuff. Like you have to, that in terms of the energy that's being generated, you don't want to kind of blowing out a hole in the wall as such. So, and particularly with a heat pump, you need to have it quite airtight. So that's where you're getting into, almost having to have it as part of the package.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And I suppose that kind of brings us nicely onto the kind of budgeting side of things. So I just wanted to kind of get your feedback and your advice on just kind of, if I were to say to you that I live in an average sized, semi-detached house in Dublin, I'm going to say it was built in 1985 and it's a behaviour of E. Could you kind of suggest the best measures to carry out if I had a budget of, let's say, €5,000, €20,000, and €50,000? Is there kind of the steps you could kind of take us through for that?
Yeah, and I think in terms of budget, I suppose, you know I would always say look at the grants that are available as well. So, grants that are available will certainly expand, yeah, your budget a little bit as well. So definitely take that into consideration. So in terms of 5,000, particularly if we're looking at houses in Dublin, I would say, if it was self built or something like that, you may have cavity walls. Generally, developer built houses in Dublin, like housing estates and stuff, won't have cavity walls. Now, not some do, but if I had €5,000 of a budget, I would be making sure that I have my attic up to standard. Um, I'd probably go for heating controls, and then I suppose with those two, depending on the type of house I had, I mightn't be able to go too much further kind of than that with 5,000. Um, Certainly, if I had cavity walls, I'd try and squeeze that in there as well. If it was in budget, and of course, there's grants there for attic walls. There's 400 for attic. If you happen to have cavity walls, there's 400 there for that. 700 for heating controls, and there's a bonus for the third measure as well. So again, there's a slight bonus there for a third measure. So again, you're kind of you should, if you had those, your standard sort of Dublin house. If you were lucky enough to have cavity walls, you probably would get the three of those done with 5k and the additional grants.
So what about if I had €20,000, what would you recommend for that?
Sure. I think when if you're looking at a figure of 20,000, we would look at attic insulation, heating controls, and certainly bring in one of the wall measures there. For most kind of, you know, Dublin style houses, certainly you would definitely get your dry lining done within that budget, particularly with the grants available on top of the 20k. Um, and possibly even external wall insulation. So again, um, depending on what's right for your own home, I would go looking at or getting contractors out to maybe kind of price for that. Again, very much dependent on the type of house and your own restrictions. Like I said earlier on, the stuff that kind of drives kind of homeowners towards one or the other is generally budget. Like, let's be honest, kind of budget is generally what kind of drives most decisions. But I suppose the the little bit that we kind of talked about earlier in terms of your dry line, and you're gonna have to redecorate, refloor, woodwork and stuff like that, like kind of, skirting boards around doors, as well. So like that sort of stuff that's kind of hidden from the actual works budget. So it may, if you've kind of expensive flooring in or finishes, or it's going to be expensive to redecorate, that might push you in the direction of external wall insulation. Like I said, if you're going to if it's been a few years since your house has been painted or it's due to be painted, that may as well kind of push you that route, because again, you're going to be getting the full external kind of done, and all the walls are going to be nice and fresh and new outside anyway, and that the cost of that, of getting the painted or decorated outside, with the grant on top of it, may actually push you down that particular route. I'm thinking Dublin houses as well, sometimes external, might actually, it could be something as simple as, I can't get my wheelie bin down the alley beside my house now with the external wall insulation. So like, there's lots of that's literally, like, it's just practical consideration when
Yeah.
you're kind of going down that route. So you may decide to externally insulate the front and back wall and dry line that kind of side wall or something like that. So there's lots of kind of unusual kind of things that come up when you actually start looking at retrofits, that kind of you may start off wanting one thing or thinking one thing, and then you realize soon, like down the line, that it might actually be a different solution is the right thing for your own home.
Yeah. And there's so many factors to consider, along the process, that you're like, oh, I didn't think of that part,
Yeah.
And so obviously then with, everything that you've said for €20,000, I could get that with my €50,000 budget. But what would be kind of additional to that then if I had €50,000? I'm like, if I had €50,000, I'm like, I just need to think about that for a second. What would I do?
What would that be like?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, what would you recommend as kind of additional measures then?
Well, like, there's huge difference between the 20 and 50. Certainly we're looking at heat pump. We're definitely into the sort of heat pump territory. Um, you know, Particularly with the heat pump, it's everything that makes a house heat pump ready. So in terms of, particularly because we're looking at a house that was built in 1985. If we're looking at a house that was built in 2004 or 2005, or even like, for heat pumps, you're further on again. We wouldn't be looking at all those extra or other bits, like kind of, in as much detail, but certainly heat pump, the stuff around getting a house heat pump ready, like like ventilation systems. You need to make the house, it has to be really well insulated, nice and airtight. Um, the likes of other kind of factors around that, like if you had a lot of open fires, like a house that was built in 1985 in Ireland is definitely going to have like at least one fireplace. You may want to either block it up, which is a quite inexpensive solution. It has to be done properly just to make sure that it's done right. But you may want to, a lot of people like their fireplace, like to keep that there. You might want to install like a room seal stove or something like that in there. And again, that's more sort of around making the house more airtight. So something like that. And then once you get your heat pump in, there we're looking at kind of solar kind of then, and like solar PV has become so popular kind of lately. It's again, it's an easy measure to install. It's quite versatile in terms of your own needs,
Hmm.
as in, it's, our homes are using electricity like literally 24/7. So there's always some sort of a demand there. Um, you know, okay, systems can be a little bit different. You might want to install a battery or something like that, but certainly 50,000 with the grants that are available as well, should get you fairly close to where you want to be in terms of an energy rating, in terms of like, having a really energy efficient home.
I'm quite impressed with what you can get done, and probably the difference that you'd feel in your home with €5,000, and that is obviously still a lot of money, but it's slightly more accessible than I had initially thought. It's like that's somewhat in reach,
Yeah,
and you'd probably be able to feel like a huge difference in your home just from that. And then also you're going to see the impact on your energy bills and, just generally the comfort of your home, which is huge for
yeah,
people,
absolutely. Yeah,
especially given that so many of us are now working from home and spending so much time here. We're starting to really realize what our home is like.
yeah. I think everybody's experiencing a bit of that now, kind of sitting around looking at rooms that they don't normally look at for as long, or in daylight, So it kind
Yeah,
of all
exactly.
the changes they want to make. But in terms of, I suppose the heat pump, the A2 rated home, or okay, a lot of the climate action plan is geared towards B2, which is achievable for most homes. Within a decent. Okay, it's going to be a considerable investment, but to get to get a house kind of up and almost installing a heat pump, and getting a house heat pump ready and getting the heat pump in, it's almost kind of aspirational for a lot of older homes. But in terms of, that aspiration, having been in older homes that have got up to that standard with heat pumps in it, the comfort is just hard to describe. You know, they really are really nice places for people to live, and I think it just creates a fantastic, quality of life for the people that live there. Compared to either being freezing cold or too warm or whatever, like it just has this really nice kind of comfort. It's kind of the bit that I kind of find. Uh, the bit that I kind of found unusual about homes with heat pumps is that, you're kind of normally sitting in at home or kind of in somebody's house, and you kind of know you're never it's never that sort of, it's like the Goldilocks sort of effect, as in, it's either too cold or it's too hot. It's never just right, and if it is just right, it's only just right for half an hour, and then all of a sudden you're roasting or you're freezing again. But homes that are kind of really well insulated and, heated with heat pumps, like I said, they just have this constant, just right sort of temperature.
Yeah.
And you're not even thinking about, am I hot or am I cold? Do I need the heating on or off? Or will I put it on for an hour tonight? It's just nice all the time, which is a really kind of, it's an unusual feeling, kind of, if
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Like you just, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a part of my day is knowing when my heat
managing
needs
the
to come.
heating system.
Exactly. Or like, I'm like, my hands are cold, my feet are cold. I need to do something about that rather than having this kind of really constant temperature. And I feel like just that's when you know that you've got it right,
Oh,
you know?
you've won. You're winning at life now, and
Yeah.
you're
So then in terms of the kind of question around grants and just the process for people to kind of go through and where they can find that information, you mentioned the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland have a range of different grants. Could you kind of take us through what grants are available? I know you mentioned before kind of attic, wall insulation, that kind of thing, but just to kind of give us an idea and what costs that might cover, because I know you've said before like a third of the cost, but just to kind of expand on that a little bit for people.
So in terms of applying for grants, definitely the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland kind of website is a great resource. You can go in, kind of have a look at the different measures, the different types of grants that are available. Your applications will generally go through, particularly for better energy homes. Anyway, it will go on to an applications portal there, apply for your grants through there. Probably the most important, or one of the very important parts about applying for grants is that all grants have to be applied for in advance of the works being carried out. So that's like a huge part of it, and really important. If the works have already started, you can't actually claim a grant, or you can't claim a grants retrospectively for works. So the grants application would be in advance. In terms of, sorry, the next part of your question, kind of on that one, Katie.
Just in terms of kind of what grants are available.
Okay, so what grants? Generally, through the Better Energy Homes program or home energy grants, we have grants, or there are grants available for attic insulation, the 3 wall insulations that we discussed earlier. So cavity wall, internal wall, external wall insulation. There's grants for heating controls. There's grants for solar thermal, which is solar hot water, solar PV, so solar electricity, heat pumps. When you get into other programs, like there's community grants and stuff like that, they will be they go to deeper measures, and they fund windows, doors, the ventilation systems, kind of we discussed kind of earlier on, stoves, kind of some extra things that you'd be required to install as part of a bigger upgrade, because generally that particular program or other programs like that will have a minimum sort of behaviour level that you need to achieve in order to be eligible for works on those programs. Again, they're put together slightly different. That's actually a big part of the work that I'm doing on sustainable energy communities is, getting communities geared up to make applications to the community grants program. So where people locally can, come together cooperatively and apply for a community grant, for their area. And again, that would open up a slightly larger suite of measures or upgrades that would be available to them as part of the grant process.
Brilliant. Yeah. So it's definitely worth checking out SEAI's website before you go ahead and do anything, just to make sure, are you eligible, and look at the process just to kind of take the pinch out, because like that, it's a third of the cost. Like, it is significant if you are looking to do, a few home energy upgrades as well. So I think it's definitely
Absolutely.
worth considering.
Huge. And probably the thing for me, particularly about SEAI's grants, is that you'll have contractors who are registered, and they are working in accordance with the Sustainable Energy Authority's domestic technical standards and specification, which is it's second to none in terms of specification. Like, they take into consideration everything when developing and updating that document, in terms of building regulations, all the important stuff that, like, your average homeowner isn't going to have the time or wherewithal to actually be able to keep on top of. Okay, is my contractor doing this right, or whatever? Like, it is there, and there is an element of quality assurance on on pretty much all SEI programs. So, like, there is oversight kind of there on our works being installed to standard.
So I feel like we've probably covered our grants and the whole area of grants, but do you recommend kind of any low interest green loan schemes, or anything that's available out there for people?
I suppose I'm probably a little bit reluctant to recommend sort of schemes or kind of products kind of in general. There are some low interest green loan schemes that are after coming on stream in the last, quite recently. I suppose they're probably not established enough probably for me to have much of an opinion on kind of yet, but certainly Unpulse have come out with a what looks to be a really good program there. Interest rates as low as 4.8%, which is pretty much as good as you're going to get kind of on the market now for any sort of finance product, um, saying that kind of again, in terms of the low interest, again, that'll be over about 10-year period. So it's something that is helpful. There are some other kind of products. I think some credit unions as well are kind of engaging with different partners kind of in the industry to provide uh, low interest loans, uh, and products to support kind of retrofits. I think there's probably a lot more needs to be done in the space, um, in terms of providers of kind of low interest green loans. It's great to see someone as big as Unpust on the market kind of with a product. But again, it'd be great to see some more kind of following suit over the next few years. But I'd say watch the
Absolutely.
space in terms of low interest green loans.
Yeah, brilliant. So, in terms of just kind of the last few questions for you, so just for first-time buyers, for people who are looking to purchase a new home, what advice would you give them in terms of things to look out for when it comes to energy efficiency? Like, what should they have their eye on? What questions should they be asking? Just when they're looking for a new home.
For when they're looking for a new home, I think the building energy rating is a good place to start. Like you have to have one if you're selling a home. I and generally they're relatively up to date. Like if a house has a B, like if I was selling a house tomorrow and I had a building energy rating done 8 years ago, for instance, I could probably use it to sell the house, but I may have got some work done in the meantime. So but generally, houses going for sale will have a current or relatively up to date building energy rating. Um, what I would look for um, pretty much all the stuff we've discussed so far. A building energy rating doesn't always reflect um, everything that was done in a home before. It's just the way they're done. There's a lot of assumptions made, particularly because you can't open a wall up to measure the thickness of insulation in it. I don't think people would be very happy if BEO assessors were done knocking holes in the walls and stuff like that to measure the thickness of insulation that's there and stuff. So there are certain assumptions that are made. So speak to the vendors, speak to this. Most people will be getting a survey done, an engineer to call out to maybe look at the structure, or to get a survey kind of done of the property and see what's there. You want a high efficiency kind of heating system. It'd be great if there was heat pump there, but it's unlikely. But high efficiency or high efficiency heating system, heating controls, good levels of insulation, and again, may not be reflected in the BR, but have they had any energy upgrade works done before? What's there that might not necessarily be reflected in the building energy rating. That's kind of it really in terms of look for something that's going to be inexpensive to run. For me, that's a big part of it. And I think it's not just the financial side of it now. I think a lot of people now, particularly kind of people who are in the sort of the first time buyer kind of position, are a lot more sort of environmentally aware and want homes that will be a lot more environmentally friendly, and that they're not kind of walking into something that's going to really increase the carbon footprint. So look for something that's well insulated, easy to manage and easy to maintain is another one. So systems that are in place, and that's a kind of big one when it comes to sort of higher technology sort of stuff. Is that stuff that isn't going to cost me a fortune or is really difficult to maintain, in service. So that's running costs and maintenance costs is something else to consider as well.
That's brilliant. And then just the kind of final question, and you have touched on this already in terms of kind of the initial low cost things that you can do in your home before investing in the kind of more expensive upgrades. But in your opinion and from your kind of experience, what impact, can our own behavior have on our household energy use?
It's huge. in terms of, I suppose, how we use our homes is going to determine the amount of energy that we use. Um, there's lots of kind of tips, kind of, and advice out there, and I see actually kind of, SAI and yourselves and Codema, like, particularly now that everybody's at home, kind of quite regularly, like tips to reduce your energy while kind of at home. So, like, again, like lighting, maximize or use natural daylight, kind of, so you don't have to be, artificially lighting your home kind of all the time. Simple things like, making sure that your dishwasher's full before you put it on, your washing machine's full before you put it on. You know, the 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 shower instead of the bath, and the 2-3 minute shower instead of the 30-minute shower definitely makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And kettles, only boil in your kettle when the bit that.
Listen, that one blew my mind. And here I go again, plugging our home energy saving kits. But I did actually use our plug-in energy monitor, and I tested how much it was costing me every time I filled the kettle. So I was filling the kettle full for just 1 cup of tea. And I calculated it that, for every cup of tea I have every day, and if I were to do that for a year, I was going to be adding €50 to my energy bill, and that's
Yeah.
what a simple thing. And that's one appliance.
I know, and like I kind of go like, that's €50. Like it's crazy when you think of it. Like, let it be in your own pocket than
Exactly.
somebody else's.
And it adds
Um,
up. It just adds
yeah.
up.
And your washing machine is the same. Your showers, if you have an electric shower in particular, it's the same. The dishwasher is the same. So make sure that you're maximizing what you're using. That's kind of the best advice kind of there. In terms of usage as well, I suppose that when you're upgrading appliances, it's probably kind of creeps a little bit outside of kind of usage. But if you are upgrading appliances, try and get the most energy efficiency appliances you can. Definitely makes a huge difference, particularly when you're looking at stuff that's going to that you're going to use a lot and uses a good bit of energy, like your dishwasher and your washing machine. It doesn't have to be 5 times the price. It's just kind of looking in your price range and maybe letting energy rating kind of steer you, as well as the other kind of features that you might be looking for as well. Certainly, like at every price point, there will be appliances that are a little bit more efficient and will save you energy.
Yeah, and it's using our purchasing power in that way to make good decisions going forward. And realistically, it will save us money in the long run. So you might look at something and go, "Oh, it's a little bit more expensive," but it is something that will, it'll have an impact in the long run. And I think it's so important as well from a behavior point of view as well, just to know that you have the power to make a difference in your own home through simple measures, like you're saying there, in terms of maximizing daylight, closing the doors to rooms you're not using, turning down radiators in rooms you're not in, like,
Absolutely, yeah.
it's all things that we're just, it comes down to just flushing money down the toilet. And we don't even probably realize we're doing it just based on habits that we've built up over the years,
Absolutely. And those energy monitors, kind of the plug-in energy monitors, you can get energy monitors that will clip onto your ESP meter and stuff like that. Like, actually monitoring your energy and being aware of what you're using is like I said, it's a real kind of, it's so informative. And like I said, even the kettle one is like, that's a really easy, it's relatively easy to do with the likes of a plug-in energy monitor. And like I said, you can calculate your savings up on like 50 quid a year on just one thing.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I have learned so much just from this conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie.